Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice lunch and welcome back to our online audience. So this is our last few sessions of this year's forum. So I hope many of us are joining us online, and I'd like to welcome the next set of panelists who will take about an hour to discuss what responsible recruitment looks like on the ground. So let's welcome them. And if everybody could take a seat so we can get started. Thank you.
Yeah, I can see. Start. Should we give it a minute or start? Okay, all right. Thanks, everyone. Ideally, we should have an energizer after the excellent lunch. But do what you have to do mentally and be energized. This is going to be an interesting panel where we are talking about what responsible recruitment should look like on the ground. Yeah, thanks. We have William connecting with us online. We have Taisuke, Bhim, and Quintin. So I'm just going to start off with the first round of questions. Get through it quickly so we have time for Q&A. Could we close the door? Yeah. So we have with us Taisuke Komatsu. I hope you got your name right. And who's with the regional office for Southeast Asia with OHCHR. They've been doing some very, very interesting reports in the region around recruitment. And one of the recent reports is, of course, on the scam centers. So you uncovered the extensive criminal operations set up to perpetrate cyber-enabled fraud in your recent report, centering on the lived experiences of victims who were subjected to human rights abuse. Can you share a bit more of the findings of the report? What are the actions the state must take to protect them? And if you have any suggestions for business, yes, but we can talk about the states to begin with.
Thank you, Vani. And my apologies that I was a bit late. Yes, I'm sorry about that. So yes, I'm gonna just move to my next slide. So February this year, we issued this report which we called it Wicked Problem. And I would just like to share some findings related to labor migration from this report that we identified in terms of the link between scam trafficking and labor migration. So when we look at the labor migration recruitment, how labor migration recruitment happens within and from the Asia Pacific region, especially for low-wage workers. As many of you know, it typically follows three pathways. So one is direct recruitment through online platforms or informal job sites. The second one is government employment services, which are meant to provide official channels. And the third one is private intermediaries, including licensed agencies, brokers, and informal social networks. But as many of you know well, these recruitment processes for labor migration are rarely straightforward. It is often complex, layered, and opaque. And for many aspiring migrant workers, navigating this system by themselves alone is nearly impossible. And as a result, they rely heavily on multiple intermediaries, agents, brokers, even acquaintances to access critical information such as travel, visa arrangement, as well as job opportunities. And this is where we see the nexus between the labor migration in and from the region and the trafficking into scam operations. So because of this dependence on intermediaries, workers can become highly vulnerable to deception, misled about the nature of the job, the conditions of work, and sometimes even the destination itself. And in fact, the private recruitment dominates labor migration in and from the region. And unfortunately, the regulatory frameworks often lack effective safeguards, oversight, and the enforcement. So what happens is, as a consequence, is recruitment practices can look strikingly similar. So it is making it extremely difficult for individuals to distinguish whether it is a legitimate job opportunity or a pathway into trafficking. And in some cases, we see even more troubling reality, which is private recruitment actors, not only informal brokers, but also licensed agencies have been complicit in trafficking individuals into scam operations. And I would like to share some findings from our report. So we did this research using the systems thinking and the behavior science methods. We interviewed survivors of trafficking from scam centers, and a critical factor that emerged from the evidence from our research is the trust. So we found that trust is often exploited and harvested by traffickers. And in the broader labor context of migration that I just spoke about, trust plays a central role because many migrant workers are already navigating uncertain, non-transparent, and risky processes. And the finding from our data, our research, the data from our research reinforces this point. So we found that nearly 75% of victims we interviewed reported being recruited through an action of a trusted source. 37% were recruited directly by someone who they knew and trusted. And another 30% first heard about the opportunity through a trusted connection. And among those who answered that they knew recruiters told us that 67% had a very high trust in the recruiters. And these recruiters include family members, former colleagues, childhood friends, and the acquaintances, acquaintances as well as new connections they met through social media platforms or online. So our finding tells this critical insight that the trust is being weaponized by traffickers. And this also raises questions for all of us here today. Like, why do victims place greater trust in these informal networks? Does it mean a lack of trust in formal recruitment processes? And are public institutions being trusted or accessible for migrant workers? I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taisuke. We have Bhim, co-founder of Shramik Sanjal, speaking next. And just building on what Taisuke said about how opaque and complex the recruitment system can be. I know your organization's been working on a comparative assessment on the Nepal-Malaysia corridor. Before we go into the findings of that, if you can just talk about the free visa, free ticket policy of Nepal. What does it look like on the ground? What is the engagement of recruitment agents? And do you think Nepal as a state has really met its obligations?
Yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Vani. Thank you, ISRB, for the invitation to the forum. So When we talk about the fair and ethical recruitment or free visa, free ticket policy of Nepal, Nepal has passed the free visa, free ticket policy in 2015, especially to corridor between Nepal and Malaysia and Nepal to GCC. That means Nepal should Nepal has that policy and no worker should be paying for the recruitment fee. But the recruitment agencies can charge about 10,000 Nepali rupees as administrative cost or something like that. But the reality is totally different. What it has been mentioned in the policy is something, and what has been practiced on the ground is different. That means majority of Nepali migrant worker seeking for a foreign employment to whether be it in Malaysia or the GCC has to pay a very high recruitment fee. It's about 400,000 Nepali rupees, which is equivalent to about 2,000 US dollar at the current exchange rate. But that has been majorly practiced in Nepal by many recruitment agency, but there are few recruitment agency who come out from that space and really try to implement the fair and ethical and employee principle from their side, and there has been some implementation around that. And then I think we have a couple of colleagues from those fair and ethical recruitment practices into this room as well. They have been implementing the fair and ethical recruitment and practicing this. And then what I found from my engagement with those recruitment agency and being as a migrant worker, lived in Qatar for over 8 years and experiencing the worst case of forced labor and exploitation in Qatar, that I myself can reflect that when I was going for Qatar, I also paid the high recruitment fee. And in 2013, and coming to that, time and place, and having those recruitment agency literally practicing the fair and ethical recruitment kind of gives me a bit of hope that there is slow, but there is a very, progress onto that. And through my engagement and also experience that the fair and ethical recruitment, the term or the topic has been heavily concentrated into the recruitment fee. That is true. For sure, the worker shouldn't be paying for the job. And it has, we have to definitely talk about there shouldn't be the fee. But there are other areas and elements that we need to also talk about, like access to information and fair hiring process and the grievance mechanism and the working condition and living condition of the migrant worker and the wages protection system in the country of destination. And those are the element is a bit of like in shadow in fair and ethical recruitment model, but that is also need to be addressed and talk about. And in addition to that, the Nepal government has also put in place some regulatory framework and some mandatory kind of processes to go through by the aspiring migrant worker or the migrant worker who are going to deploy in country of destinations. And that is the pre-departure orientation that Nepal government has mandated, a mandatory pre-departure orientation for all migrant worker to attend at least 12 hours of pre-departure orientation. And that basically covers a lot of information about the cultural differences, do's and don't, and many other aspects of the worker rights in country of destination. But those orientations are also not very effective in terms of Nepal. I mean, the migrant worker can go attend and there is no kind of evaluation and check and balance how effective that orientation program is going. And sometimes the migrant worker are just, enroll into the orientation program and they don't really have to go and then get the kind of information they're supposed to receive, and that is something happening. But in contrast to that, through our engagement, Shramik, Sanjal, our organization, in one of our pillar, which is called empowerment, that we run a pre-departure orientation to the migrant worker, and we have delivered numerous pre-departure orientation to over like 3,000 plus migrant worker, and that is quite interesting for us. And then during the orientation program, we run a very simple kind of a survey to understand what is their level of like the information about the fair and ethical recruitment, and the money that they use while they come to country of destination and on and send back home, and their expectation while being in Nepal in terms of living condition, in terms of working condition in country of destinations. And interestingly, the a majority of the migrant worker have responded that they have kind of mixed level of informations about the fair and ethical recruitment model. Almost like half of them responded that they were aware about the fair and ethical model, while the 50% is almost 50% has they are not aware about. And
I think that would probably be a good segue into what Quintin is talking
Sure.
about, right? So we have, we see the recruitment corruption. We see even if governments have taken the right policies, it's not implemented.
Yeah.
So Quintin, with 58 and the work you do with businesses to ensure responsible recruitment, could you share a successful case study on what happens when companies seek to implement this in a way that drives positive outcome? Because a lot of what Bhim says is also crossing over to company responsibility once the worker goes to the place of employment.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Vani. And thank you both. So 58, all of our work really is a mix of research and technology solutions that look at improving working conditions in the supply chain. And I wanted to talk today specifically about our platform, Just Good Work. So Just Good Work is a mobile tool that was designed to help make sure that workers know what is okay and what is not okay, their rights and their responsibilities from the earliest possible stage of recruitment all the way through their journey into work and when they would return home again. It started in 2019 in East Africa for workers who were going into the Gulf. But it's very special to be doing this forum in Malaysia, because Malaysia was one of the first next countries where the app was adapted for during COVID, actually. So we make sure that the information is as accessible as it can be in text and in audio, and that it's accurate in terms of both what the law says, but also in terms of workers' actual stories, and that it's continually updated and informed by their experiences. Now, I wanted to share the specific case study of Evergreen. So they are a Malaysian furniture manufacturer, and their HR manager unfortunately couldn't be at the forum this week, but he asked me to share their story. The app generally is free for workers to access wherever it's available, but for companies like Evergreen, they can pay to include a work portal in the app. And what that means is they can include really any pre-departure or information about the company that they want. And in Evergreen's case, this meant some videos of their factory floor, of the accommodation, of information about what fees workers shouldn't be paying, and trying to make sure that that information was accurate, regardless of what recruiter was being used in their recruitment from Nepal. So they worked very closely with their Malaysian recruiter to roll this out, so that any worker, as soon as they access a job ad, they would download the app through the QR code or the link. And this is in their home country. So what it meant for the factory is that when people arrived, they could see immediately that the factory looked like what they thought it was going to look like. What they said to the HR manager was very excited the first time he talked to us about it, because he said for the first time people could show friends and family what the workplace was going to look like that they were choosing to go to, and they could decide if that was the right thing for them or not. He said what it meant for us as HR, the HR team at the factory, is when people arrived, we didn't have to spend a lot of time unpicking misinformation or disinformation that had happened in recruitment, because the recruiter could say to those workers, if anything looks different to what you see in the factory, to what you see in the app, please come and tell us. But it also meant that straight away people were immediately into their work. And what he described as the reason why they did this and wanted to implement the application was prior to using the app, with every cohort they recruited, around 15 to 20% of that each cohort would immediately either want to return home or would want to move on to other work once they arrived in Malaysia, because things were so different to what they expected. And so I wanted to just show a little bit of what that meant then for the factory once this took place. And very practically, it was a significant reduction in initially that voluntary return rate, or voluntary kind of moving on rate. So from 14% down to 1%. And 2 years on, we just talked to them a couple of weeks ago. And for the first time, 100% of that same cohort that were recruited with those kind of aligned expectations of what they were coming to, 100% renewed their contracts and wanted to remain working for the factory. And they said that had never happened before. So very practically, what that had meant for them was they had saved the cost of recruiting each worker and the re-recruitment that had to happen with that initial turnover rate, but also the reduced recruitment of having everyone renew their contracts those 2 years on. It was about $850 was the cost of recruitment for each worker. So in their case, this saved them around $20,000. Now, with some of the costs of recruitment that we've heard the last couple of days, you can see that saving would be much, much greater even for some factories. So I just wanted to share this as a very practical example of how a factory is using this kind of connecting with workers very early in recruitment, aligning expectations in a way that is saving them money, and now they can make the case internally that they can pay for the cost of recruitment far more effectively because of these savings that they're making through improved HR outcomes, really. That reduced turnover, improved onboarding, and those things aren't even factored into the cost savings. And we'd like to look at how we can start to model that as this case study is developed. Thanks.
Thank you, Quintin. Hi, William. We miss you in the room. Thanks for joining us online. So we've spoken about state responsibility, recruitment reforms, business responsibility. From your vast network of partners, what are the gaps you see in access to justice, alternative dispute mechanisms, transnational justice, both by states and businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Vani. And I would have loved to be there, but for some reason, just couldn't get there. But let me, I think there's an echo, but are you all getting it? Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. So perfect. I think one of the biggest challenges in access to justice is, especially, and I appreciate this context of looking at recruitment fees and things like that, but when we within our network are looking, and we've seen access to justice in terms of workers not getting their wages. So this is one of the biggest issues and the most recurring issue throughout the workers' kind of work life, particularly in this temporary labor migration programs. When we started documenting something like in 2008, when we started documenting worker abuses, workers' wages or non-payment of wages, and in different forms, whether it is deductions, whether it is late payments, whether it is half payments, or whether it is no payments at all, whether it is end of service benefits not being given, all these kind of range of issues that are related to wages, we found non-payment of wages in a general way as the biggest issue that workers kind of complain against. And this is across the board, from domestic workers to even high-skilled workers sometimes. So this is something that we need to kind of look at. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we have. We've tried to raise this issue at different levels in terms of why access to justice then when workers complain. And I know there is a shift today in terms of online complaint mechanisms by many member states kind of thing, but there is the whole question of accessibility to these online systems. Companies have also put in some kind of complaint mechanisms online, and companies have also tried different processes like you know you get confidence building among the workers to make a complaint, different processes like mailboxes, uh, anonymous complaints, and such procedures have been put in by companies. But still, I think what we continue to receive, and of course this depends, this varies from company to company and the size of the company. Generally, as a general kind of issue, but we are seeing, of course, this doesn't, you cannot generalize so easily as well, particularly when we look at the context of Malaysia. But generally, it's big brands that seem to have some measures in place where wages are given on a timely manner, they are being monitored, and there is a system of complaint kind of thing. This is largely with big brands. But as you go lower down in the supply chain of big brands, and as you look at small and medium enterprises, and then as you come even lower into the informal sector like domestic work, that is where you begin to see a lot of the challenges in terms of access to justice and in terms of what complaints workers can make. Because it's not only about making complaints, it is not only about having access to making complaints, but it is also the how after making a complaint, what happens to the worker in terms of how the worker can be how the employer can move from making the worker undocumented, lose his job, or some kind of harm done by the recruiter in the country of origin, or threats to the family members of the worker in the country of origin. Now, these are some things that we have seen over time, kind of thing happening, and they continue to happen in terms of access to justice. We have, as MFA, called for and continue to call for in our wage theft campaign. We have called for transnational justice mechanisms, and that also only as a last resort, because whatever it is, we believe that justice should be available to the migrant in the country in which he or she is working. But because of the time period of the complaints and because the whole nature of the safety and safe space that the migrant needs to be in, and sometimes that is not possible in a destination country, we propose, or we are advocating for, a transnational justice mechanism where the worker can return home and then make a complaint when the worker is in a safe space. But we have a long way to go in member states agreeing to this in a bilateral agreement kind of thing. So this is where we are now at the moment in terms of continuing to advocate. We believe, and that's why I think COVID was an eye-opener in the sense of a lot of countries experimented with online justice mechanisms, remote hearings, and things like that. And this is a possibility that can be explored within labor migration corridor, where we could establish formal remote hearing procedures across corridors. Now, this is something still to be taken up by some member states, but there are member states that are willing to look at this. It was a conversation in the Abu Dhabi dialogue. It was a conversation that happened on the sidelines of the IMRF, but it is definitely a conversation that needs to happen more. Alternative dispute mechanisms is something that is growing now, but I would caution against alternative dispute mechanisms only unless they are very robust and transparent in some way, because the mediation processes generally follow a power dynamic in which the worker is left in a situation of take it or leave it. And that, I think, is challenging in that sense kind of thing, because we've seen mediation, even when the state is involved in terms of countries of origin, you have the labor attaches being involved in mediation processes. And more dangerously, I think, when civil society is engaged as well, because when civil society is engaged, you get these non-disclosure agreements kind of thing, which then doesn't allow the transparency that even civil society needs to put forward or have in terms of what was agreed upon. And we have seen in recent cases kind of thing where it has not entirely worked in the favor of the worker or in favor of all the workers complaining. I'll leave it at that.
William, I'll come back to you with the first question for the second round while we have you here. It's interesting what you're saying about alternative dispute mechanisms, because that seems to be promoted by a lot of destination countries, and origin countries seem to be towing the line as well. So this brings us to the kind of corruption we see, not just in private recruitment agencies, but also state agencies. If you could speak a little bit more about this corruption.
Look, I think we have to recognize that corruption has become kind of almost the mainstay of temporary labor migration programs. And I'm saying this because from the recruitment process already, and have seen this, and from Nepal to Bangladesh, India, even the Philippines, kind of thing, within the whole system of the way temporary labor migration programs are governed from recruitment, there is already corruption kind of thing that happens at that space. It varies in different countries and in different ways, but it is something that is found in all countries. But in terms of alternative dispute mechanisms kind of thing, I think this is a push is being made towards this. And at some stage, countries of origin and countries of the states involved serve together with the employers as a power base against the migrant workers, and largely because it is taken off kind of thing, where with countries of origin having no other option but to be able to look for and explore new markets. This has become an easy way out, particularly because also these recruitment agencies go under a kind of rating mechanism, and there is enough leeway within a rating mechanism and the country of origin is companies are not immediately blacklisted if something goes wrong, or they have been doing some corrupt practice and things like. Countries of origin don't necessarily immediately blacklist those companies. They are given a second chance, a third chance, and things like that. And because also I think the way the countries of destination pressure countries of origin. I'll give you one example of this kind of thing. For example, now we are seeing where, at least in the past in the Gulf, we had missions, country of origin missions, playing an active role in, let us say, mediation for their migrant workers when the migrant workers came to complain. Many of the mission labor attaches would call up the employer to be able to follow through on the complaint of the migrant worker. But now countries of origin have been told that is not their job. So and I was very recently actually with a labor attaché, just in fact last week, who said they have been called several times to say, you cannot intervene. If there is any issue, let it be taken up by the Ministry of Labor in the country of destination. So basically the pressure that is put on countries of origin to succumb to not being able to follow up, the labor attaché not to be able to follow up, but to forward it to the Ministry of Labor. And of course, that the Ministry of Labor has all the kind of pressures from the country of destination by the employers, by the company, and depending on who is in what space. And I'm talking particularly of certain regions in the world where there's a lot of pressure on the labor ministries itself by employers, by companies, kind of thing, when it comes to access to justice issues. And so sometimes when countries of origin are involved in trying to follow with the country of destination, this can take forever. And we are seeing this in these online systems as well as in the alternative processes that are being suggested. They take forever. They play out. They have time to play with, and they play out the permit of the period of the permit of the migrant worker till such time as the migrant worker either gives up, passes on power of attorney to the mission, or moves or is repatriated back to the country, and then that goes into a forever delay process. In a recent engagement with countries of mission, we did ask if any of them have been successful with the power of attorney process once the migrant worker has returned. They have come back saying to us that it's very rare that they are successful in these, and they still have cases that are pending 2-3 years kind of thing, and these are big companies. So I think there is a lot that plays out in this. Thank you.
Thanks, William. If you can, we are hoping to have a Q&A at the end of it. If you could stay on, please. And that was really interesting, linking the missions to this issue of recruitment as well. Taisuke, coming back to you, your office also did another report on the temporary labor migration, which is very similar to what William and Bhim have covered in terms of the GCC. What recommendations do you have for states, including in the context of newer sectors of employment that are emerging, which are particularly exploited?
Yeah, thank you, Vani. If you can put my slide back, that would be great. I just have one slide to share the QR code of the report. But a few years ago, we issued a report called issued a report on temporary labor migration programs within and from the region, and we called it "We Wanted Workers, but Human Beings Came." And so temporary labor migration programs is the dominant form of labor migration in this region, which are often described as triple win solution for countries of destination, countries of origin, and the migrant workers. But we believe in reality, they create heavy bureaucratic hurdles, which make migrant workers vulnerable to human rights abuse and violations. And the structure of these programs are marked by temporary status, the restriction on human rights, unequal power dynamics, not only between employers or recruiters and workers, but as well as countries of origin and destination, as William described. And they place migrant workers in very precarious and often discriminatory conditions. And this isn't just inconvenience; it actually exposes to real risks, such as exploitation, trafficking, as I spoke earlier. So for us, the challenge is how to not only improving the procedures, but how we can rethink labor migration in this region more fundamentally. So we believe that in order to address exploitation in a more meaningful way, we need to go beyond fixing recruitment. We recommend to systemic policy change for labor migration so that it can be sustainable and rights respecting. And we need to move away from models that depend on enforced temporariness and the unequal treatment of migrant workers, and that is grounded in principles of fairness and dignity. And under international human rights law, we have this thing called the threshold of non-discrimination. So any policy or measures should be assessed against the proportionality, necessity, and legality. And if any of it doesn't pass this test, it is considered discriminatory, therefore should be removed. And it also states, and there are also very many promising practices around the world, and also in the region. For example, Australia recently launched a pilot project on called Workplace Justice Visa. So like when migrant workers face labor exploitations or other abuses, they can switch to this visa to pursue justice while continue to work in Australia, because while they're pursuing justice, they still also need to work to survive. And there are some criticism or like shortcomings already identified by civil society in Australia, as well as the special rapporteur on the contemporary forms of slavery. And I believe that Australia is going to evaluate this program, because it's a pilot project, but hopefully this kind of initiatives can be replicated in the region, but also around the world, so that the labor migration becomes more sustainable. And maybe, so this is a recommendation I have, and maybe one message I would like to highlight is even migration may be temporary, the human rights are permanent. And migrant workers must have equal access to justice and the ability to make meaningful choice about their work and their life. And in other words, they must be recognized not just as laborer, but as human beings with full rights and dignity. Thank you.
If you can just take 30 seconds, the Australia, what they're exploring, is it for all sectors or a specific?
I understand it's, so this is one of the criticisms. So it only applies to migrant workers at a certain scheme. Sorry, I don't remember the name of the labor scheme. But so this is one of the criticism. And another criticism is that the undocumented migrant workers cannot use this system. So hopefully this assessment will be taken up after the pilot process. Thank you.
Coming to you, your Just Good Work app looks at knowledge sharing at the pre-departure level. And as we discussed, even when they're at work, there is an element of, I'm very, very curious to know more about it. Can you share a bit more on the impact it has had before workers leave and during their tenure of work as well?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can share a bit of the impact and maybe some of the challenges as well. So I think one of the, maybe if we stick with when people are in work as one example, we've been running some pilots actually of extending the capability of the app around an AI chatbot to enable voice interaction so people can just talk about their experience, talk about asking questions in the way that they think about their situation. And we've been trialing it in India in some of the brick kiln areas where literacy is more challenging. In a 2-month pilot, there were about 1,500 workers who used the chatbot, just talking to it in voice mainly. And they, of that cohort, 20% identified they were had an indicator of forced labor and were able to get connected to a local organization who could help them immediately get some support with that. And 77 of those were then able to be removed fully from that situation. And that work is ongoing as it carries on. So we want to see that kind of approach. We're trialing it now in the UK and the seasonal work scheme. And so that kind of thing is extending. I think one of the challenges is often getting significant enough collaboration across the sector to see something like consistent information for workers and consistent insight about their experiences that you can see at the level of a sector. We do see it with the seasonal work scheme in the UK. So anyone who comes to the UK on the seasonal work visa uses the Just Good Work app as part of that journey. And it means that everyone can have confidence that all workers are receiving the same information during their recruitment and during their work in the UK. But it's challenging. It's been challenging to find a way to replicate that in other sectors because if the collaboration doesn't exist in the same way that it does through organizations like Stronger Together in the UK, then it can be very challenging. I think grassroots engagement around, so community outreach is something we see as really critical as well. It was a huge factor when the app was launched in Kenya, connecting with people through faith community networks, through student union groups, through other community organizations where workers would have a high level of trust already. Again, we feel like that's a really critical factor that needs to be replicated in more places. And maybe one last thing to note on challenges is measuring, how do you effectively measure the effectiveness of prevention? How can you know effectively if what you're doing to help prevent an issue is having the kind of intended impact? And I guess a lot of what we heard yesterday around the efforts to try and align data and understanding around some of the baselines hopefully can help us move more quickly to being able to effectively understand and measure preventative efforts as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Quintin. So as I mentioned, Shramik Sanjal did do a survey. They're doing a comparative assessment. We have the lead researcher of the survey here, who's surveyed 2,000 workers pre-departure and while in Malaysia to compare the experiences between those who went through ethical recruitment agents and the rest. So Anuj, exactly 5 minutes because we want to have time for Q&As. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So 5 minutes is a lot of time. So just to reiterate what you just said about the temporary migration. So especially migration from Nepal is the permanent form of temporary labor migration because no one goes there and then just spend 2 years of contract and return. It's not like that in Nepal, at least. So Bhim earlier mentioned about the pre-departure orientation program, and we had opportunity to survey 2,000 odd aspirants, and then so whatever been discussed about the ethical recruitment pathway, that is actually resonated in our data as well. So around 34% of that respondent preferred use of remittance is savings, which is pretty interesting. And then the other one is education, which is roughly 19.5%. And then the third one is investment. So this is pretty interesting data, which is unheard of until this ethical recruitment thing came into play in this migration business, at least in Nepal. So we ran a survey about that thing, and then we try to scale up in the destination country, so especially Nepal Malaysia corridor, and then we managed to do this pilot with 51 respondents with 3 hypotheses to start with. So one is about cost and debt. Of course, ethical pathway will have lesser cost, recruitment cost, and also lesser debt, similar with safety and rights. And then the other one, rather directional, which came into being after we ran the survey and do the analysis. So it is about satisfaction and protection. So our findings is whatever we discussed yesterday and also today. It is about the ethical recruitment is the way, and then that actually translated in our survey as well. So now we have evidence to actually, go and then pitch this. So ethical pathway workers rarely pay and also rarely borrow, unlike the traditional way. And then also we talked about debt and financial stress. So debt has a felt cost, so which is significantly lower amongst ethical pathway workers versus traditional. So we have this indicator, so I can explain later about the method and stuffs. But so ethical, it is 2.14 versus traditional, it is 3.53, which is significant difference. And also, having said that, ethical pathway, zero cost, employer pay model, and so forth, even in our survey, 1 in 3 who self-reported as ethical pathway migrants, 1 in 3 still pay the fee. So probably to informal channels, which is also echoed in the discussion yesterday and today. And then we mentioned a bit about this free visa, free ticket. So 10,000 rupees cap for as a service charge. And that actually is window for corruption. I mean, the lesser aware the workers are, more vulnerable they are to pay higher recruitment cost. And then one of the victims, let's say, is in the panel in front of you, who paid huge recruitment pay to go to Qatar. And also for ethical recruitment agencies, which are very few in case of Nepal, and then the certification of their ethical practice are not rewarded in Nepal, at least. Although it is recognized elsewhere, but it is not rewarded. So they go through the same way to find the business and then also navigate through the bureaucracy of Nepal. So it's not different in Nepal, but definitely they are making difference. And then interestingly, for Nepal-Malaysia corridor, currently we do not have any MOU. We had one in 2018 after 17 months of hiatus, but that had a sunset clause, and then it expired in 2023. And I'm not aware if that is being discussed at the moment. So we don't have anything at the moment. There are a lot of things.
If you can just add one last point and wrap up on what are the, if you can mention 2 parameters of what's considered ethical recruitment, how workers identify. And
we have varieties of definition. Just to start, it is worker don't pay. And then either it is employer or someone else, but worker don't pay. So that is ethical. So just to wrap up, the one last thing. So who pays for recruitment is the corridor's movable variable. that for our research, and the evidence says the outcomes that matter move with it. So I think this is for every one of us to think about ethical recruitment. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have some questions online which Carmen will share.
Exactly. Thank you. So from the online audience, online participants, there are a couple of questions. The first one being, what is the one thing, it's a good question, but a bit tricky. What is the one thing, for example, policy, practice, reform, that if happened tomorrow would improve recruitment outcomes from migrant workers in the region?
If you can keep the answers to just a minute, 1 minute.
Yeah. I have a very simple answer to that. No worker should be paying for, no matter whether it's a policy outcome or whatever things we have, whatever discussion we have. At the end of the day, the worker shouldn't be paying for their job. Thank you.
Okay, good. The other question is, recruitment fees have shown themselves hard to eliminate. That's why we're having this forum. What approaches are showing, according to you and your experiences or field, the most promised? So something you would like to highlight, I guess, that is actually working for responsible recruitment.
So I think for sure this example of the factory Evergreen that I mentioned, because they were able to communicate both through the Malaysian recruiter and the agencies they were working with in Nepal to work very closely with individuals as early as possible into the start of their recruitment journey. I think that kind of clarity of or consistent communication throughout that pathway, we definitely saw the fees reduce in the recruitment of that cohort that I mentioned. But I think, as everyone has said, there's still a long way to go around some of the more informal or even earlier stage kind of initial costs that somebody might pay in their village or so on. But yeah.
I have a follow-up question that maybe Taisuke and then Quintin. I know MFA is also doing work in Africa. We are seeing like really long distance recruitment for low income jobs. We've seen in the scam centers, African workers being recruited as well. If you can speak a bit more about the recruitment environment in many of the African states that are very, very keen to send their citizens abroad. I think we haven't spoken enough about the Africa-Asia, Africa-GCC corridor. If either of you want to think, or William, if you have something to share.
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, I forgot to mention that in our research, we actually interviewed some African victims, including those from South Africa, Zimbabwe, and we keep hearing about victims from Uganda, Ethiopia, and so on. And in terms of recruitment environment, so one of the reflections I'm having over the last 2 days is it because the lack of implementation of employers' pay principles and the ethical recruitment? Is it also contributing to people being deceived into scam trafficking because it's so fragmented and because I was thinking, okay, there's a legitimate job, but you have to pay recruitment fee. And then there's this pathway in trafficking, but you don't have to pay for the broker, even though we have seen cases that the brokers were involved. And there's actually one court case in Kenya that the victims from, I think the person was trafficked into scam compound in Myanmar. He lodged a complaint to the labor court against the broker, and the broker got reprimanded by the labor court. So, in short, I think also recruiters can help prevent this kind of trafficking by implementing the employer's pay principles and also implementing ethical recruitment practices.
Thank you. William and then Quintin.
Yeah, thanks, Vani, for pointing this out. I think this is a very critical issue for us. We are speaking about this within the Asian region, but we must also recognize that over the years, Asian countries of origin have become a little more adept or aggressive in protecting the rights of their workers. But at the same time, as this has been happening, there seems to be an endless supply of workers, as we see even now African workers kind of being recruited to work in this kind of region. And I think this is because we are not looking critically enough at the way this temporary labor migration programs operate. We have taken it for granted, and even within now the big UN discourse, it seems as if temporary labor migration programs are here to stay and how we can improve them. As long as we have this temporary labor migration programs and a recruitment model built into it, I think we will always have to deal with this seemingly endless supply of workers that goes to a race to the bottom of the barrel. I think we need to be a lot more critical of this model in itself, the temporary labor migration program, and how recruitment fits within that. The other point I think is we don't talk about it enough, but we need to talk about the organizing of workers. And I'm not saying just trade unions. I think trade unions have to do a lot more across corridors, but I'm talking about just the labor movement, which involves civil society, social movements, and trade unions, looking at what's happening in labor and migrant workers and temporary labor migration programs being symptomatic of what is happening in the world of work today in terms of labor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe just to add a couple of other things. When we first started work with the app in Nairobi, we did some work with recruiters who just to sense check the content. And there was information saying that in the Kenyan law, it said you could only charge 1 month's of salary as the cost or fee of recruitment, at least at that moment in time. But all of the recruiters put their hands up and said that can't be what the law says because that's not what any of us do. So there wasn't even a connection with what the law said into actual practice. And then at some point later in the conversation, somebody put their hand up again and said, no, I've just been unchecked and that is what it says. So now what do we do? And so that was one of the areas that we've seen. But I think also the stigma often that is attached with going to the Gulf as a very aspirational destination where a lot of Kenyans are going for work, or Ugandans and so on, means that often when we talk to people in the Gulf, they said friends and family at home won't believe what is happening to us here, the conditions that we've experienced, because they think we just want to keep it for ourselves. And so it's overcoming that as well as a real challenge in that region.
And great discussions. One last point, Bhim, if you don't. You're part of the Global Migrant Workers Network, which brings in Asian and African workers. And as William mentioned, civil society has to come together to challenge the rules of temporary labor migration. What kind of knowledge sharing do you have there? You have exactly 30 seconds.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Julium, for raising this. Actually, I, along with many other migrant workers across the Africa and Asia, has come together and to organize the migrant worker in GCC and Malaysia, basically from the low-income sector, including construction, hotel and hospitality, domestic work, agriculture, and we have got about like 27 countries already our member and 20,000 plus member across the world. So it is a great platform for us to kind of collaborate each other, and we have got that network to kind of amplify the work that we are doing, and we are very, very happy to share any kind of references and knowledge sharing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, William, Quintin, Bhim, and Taisuke, and Anuj for your interventions from the floor. And we wrap up the session with this.